Hi, and welcome to the Origins Podcast. I'm your host, Lawrence Krauss. As many of you know, my new book, The War on Science, is appearing July 29th of this year in the United States and Canada. And to celebrate that, we've interviewed many of the authors, of the 39 authors who have contributed to this volume. And we have 20 separate podcast interviews that will be airing over the next 20 days, starting July 22nd, before and after the book first appears, with many of the authors in the book on a host of different subjects. The authors we will have interviews with in order of appearance over the next 20 days are Richard Dawkins, Niall Ferguson, Nicholas Christakis, Maarten Boudry, Abigail Thompson, John Armstrong, Sally Satel, Solveig and Joshua Katz, Francis Widdowson, Carole Hooven, Janice Fiamengo, Geoff Horsman, Alessandro Strumia, Roger Cohen and Amy Wax, Peter Boghossian, Lauren Schwartz and Arthur Rousseau, Alex Byrne and Modi Gorin, Judith Sisa and Alice Sullivan, Karleen Gribble, and finally Dorian Abbott. The topics that will be discussed will range over the need for free speech and open inquiry in science and the need to preserve scientific integrity, stressed by our first podcast interviewee, Richard Dawkins, and we'll once again go over historical examples of how academia has been hijacked by ideology in the past and the negative consequences that have come from that, to issues of how specific disciplines, including mathematics, have been distorted, and how certain departments at universities now specifically claim that they are social activists, and a degree in their field is a degree in either critical social justice or social activism, not a degree in a specific area of scholarship, how ideology has permeated universities. We'll proceed also to discuss issues in medicine. Sally Satel will talk about how social justice has hijacked medicine. And also, when it comes to issues of gender-affirming care, we have a variety of authors who are going to speak about the issues there and how too often gender-affirming care claims are made that are not based on empirical evidence, in fact, falsely discuss the literature in ways that are harmful to young people. We'll talk to several people who, for one reason or another, have been canceled for saying things. Francis Widdowson at Mount Royal University in Canada, and Carole Hooven from Harvard, who eventually had to leave Harvard after saying on television that sex is binary in biology. We'll be talking to people who've looking at the impact of diversity, equity, and inclusion in academia and how it's restricting free inquiry and also restricting, in many ways, scientific merit at those universities. And finally, Dorian Abbott, the last contributor to our series, will be talking about 3 principles he believes are essential to separate science and politics and keep academia free from ideology and more for open questioning and progress, and to make sure that science is based on empirical evidence, and where we go where the evidence is, whether it's convenient or not, whether it's politically correct or not, and we're willing to debate all ideas that nothing is sacred, a central feature of what science should be about and what, in some sense, this podcast is about. So I hope you really enjoy the next 20 days, and we've enjoyed bringing it to you. So with no further ado, The War on Science, the interviews. Well, Karleen Gribble, thanks for joining me to discuss your article in the book, The War on Science. And the title of your article is The Desexing of Language in Women's Health Research and Care, a story of marginalization of science, cultural imperialism, and abuse of power. Wow. Okay. Before we get there, though, I wanted to this is an Origins podcast, and I like to find out how people got to the point where we begin to talk about what they're doing. And I wanted to talk about that with you. You went into nursing. You were a student at the School of Nursing in Western Sydney, right? Western Sydney University.
Well, I'm at Western Sydney University, but I'm not a nurse. So I actually started out in agriculture.
You started, okay, good. I was going to ask how you got to nursing, but let's talk about how you got to nursing through agriculture. Your family come from a farm, perhaps?
No, they don't. But I studied agriculture at school, and I thought it was really interesting. And so when I finished school, I went away to a country university, and I did a Bachelor of Rural Science.
Okay, but if you weren't from a farm, what was it about agriculture that captured you?
It was just really interesting. I think that I've always been interested, well, just interested in lots of things, generally speaking. And agriculture is really, you've got to consider a lot of things to do farming well.
Yeah,
So
sure.
you've got to be putting together pieces of puzzles to get a whole picture. And I think that that was perhaps something that attracted me to
Well,
that area of work.
well, you're obviously interested in biology. Was it biology, I mean, understanding animals that also got you started in agriculture?
Yeah, it was actually more plants. I was really interested in plants.
Oh,
So,
plants, okay.
yeah.
Y
And I
your
mean,
par either your parents have any background in that? No?
no, no, I was the first in my family to go to university. My parents had left school at 14 and 15, and, I
Oh,
grew up on welfare. Like, there was no expectation that I was gonna be able to go to
wow,
university.
wow.
But and it all just happened really by accident more than by any great plan. But I think it was one of the best decisions I ever made. I mean, if you study agriculture, you do all of the sciences pretty much.
Including
Uh,
physics? Just checking. Including physics?
yes, no,
Yes.
including physics.
I
Yeah,
always
physics,
wonder.
chemistry, biology, soil
Uh,
science,
wo
geology,
wow.
even a bit of economics. You don't do any psychology
Mhm.
or sociology, so those are things that you don't do, but you really do get a very broad understanding of science and how things fit together.
And
And, so, yeah.
and then was that also at Western Sydney? Was that where did you study agriculture?
So that it was at the University of New England, which is a rural university in New South Wales where I live. It's a city of about 30,000 people, and yeah.
Okay, well, yes, and the University of New England sounds like something in the Northeast of the United States, so it's good to learn there's one
Yeah,
there
we
as
have one.
well. Okay, now how did you take the long and winding road from agriculture to nursing then?
Well, after I finished my undergrad, I started a PhD, which was in plant physiology. And then a
Oh.
couple of years into that, I had a baby. And all of a sudden, plants weren't so interesting anymore. Um, and I got really interested in breastfeeding. Was the subject that really I hadn't I'd studied lactation, of course, when I did agriculture, but in terms of human lactation and breastfeeding and everything associated with that, that was quite new to me, and I was just fascinated by it. So I had to finish the PhD
Uh-huh,
in plant physiology, which I did, and
uh-huh.
um, and then when I finished that, I was like, right, okay, so how can I get in to do breastfeeding research? So that's how I ended up in the School of Nursing and Midwifery.
Okay, so your PhD is in plant physiology, but you started to do research in breastfeeding, and that ended up therefore being in a school of nursing, but you actually don't have a nursing degree then or anything like that?
No, no, I'm not a health professional of any kind.
Okay, it's alright. I taught astronomy for 30 years, but I never had taken an astronomy course in my life. I mean, I was in the physics and astronomy department. So, I think it's important to realize for people that you can, lifelong learning. What you do in school, and that, is not when you stop learning. And so you have basically most of your career has been involved looking at research in breastfeeding and primarily as a global health and in Western high income areas. Is that right, basically?
So some of it's been in high income country context. A lot of it's actually been in emergency context, which had been really more focused on low and middle income countries.
Mhm.
So I do a lot of work globally with an organisation called the Infant and Young Child Feeding in Emergencies Core Group, which is a very long name.
Mhm.
But we really work to develop guidance to help governments and humanitarian organisations to support the needs of very young children in disasters so that they survive, really. And that's mostly focused around ensuring that their feeding needs are met. So supporting their mothers or caregivers to breastfeed them. And if they can't be breastfed, then ensuring that their caregivers receive appropriate support to formula feed them, which can be very difficult.
Yeah.
But
Okay, but now, but you become concerned, and the reason you wrote in the book is about this effort to to desex language in maternity, and obviously you feel it's important, and I'll read something you wrote and ask you to comment. It's been long understood that the sex of individuals should be made visible when sex is relevant to ensure sex-based needs and rights are not overlooked. Thus, the sex terms of women, meaning adult female people, and mothers, meaning female parents, have been central to research, policy, advocacy, and communication regarding female reproduction. However, in recent years, those working in maternal and child health have experienced pressure to avoid these terms and desex our language. And that's something that is of great concern to you. And as you point out, I think this is kind of recent. This effort to switch from from sex to gender identity, and why don't we talk about that a little bit?
yeah, well, I mean, I first started to notice this becoming an issue around 2015, 2016, but it was really only predominantly in the US and Canada that I was
Mm.
seeing people talking about this and wanting to change language. And at the time, I was like, oh, this is interesting. I wonder what the solution to this might be. And so I sort of, you know, talked to people, read things, tried to find out what the solution might be, and actually realized eventually that there wasn't really one. And then it was during the COVID-19 pandemic, because as I mentioned, a lot of my work is in emergencies.
Hmm.
It was a very large emergency. And the difficulty that you have in infectious disease emergencies when it comes to breastfeeding is that the normal action that you take when there's a disease epidemic and somebody is infected and you want to prevent them from infecting somebody who's not infected is that you separate them. But that's a very weighty thing to do if the infected person you're speaking about is a new mother and the uninfected person is her newborn baby. You've got to work out, is the risk of separation and preventing breastfeeding greater than the risk that the disease might pose to the baby or the infection risk to the baby? And we've gotten this terribly wrong in the past before. The HIV pandemic, you know, breastfeeding can transmit HIV, but
Yeah.
not easily, and really, really quite, really not easily if the mother is exclusively breastfeeding. But recommendations for a number of years were that women who had HIV not breastfeed, and the result of that was deaths all over
Hmm.
numerous countries in Africa. The risk of not breastfeeding was much greater than the risk of HIV. So when we had this new infection come, everything was up in the air. What do we actually do about a situation where a mother is infected with SARS-CoV-2 and her baby is not? Do we separate them or not? Do we support breastfeeding or not? And so there was a lot of work going in that area to work out what to do. And fortunately, it was clear pretty early from the pandemic that this disease did not cause serious illness in babies. Like, it was very rare for that to be
Hmm.
a serious problem. And so WHO recommendations early on were not to separate mothers and babies, for standard care to continue, and mothers to continue breastfeeding. But unfortunately, the US Centers for Disease Control and Prevention came out with a different recommendation, and which was to separate mothers and babies, if possible, if the mother had COVID. And that recommendation spread all around the world to low and middle income countries where infant mortality rates were, obviously much higher than in the US. And so we had this situation where we're getting mothers and babies separated in numbers never seen before in the world. And at the same time, we had organizations, including international organizations, moving from, rather than talking about mothers, to talking about parents, and saying things like babies and parents shouldn't be separated from one mother, when actually it doesn't matter for a baby if they're separated from their father. They don't actually need their father when they're newborns, but they do need their mother. Yeah, there's a vast difference between a mother and a father to a newborn baby. And so we're having these two things coming from the US.
It all
So the
came from
CDC
the U.S.,
recommendation,
the source of all. Yes. Anyway.
well, it's something made me and many others very angry that we were seeing these two things coming from the same place. And it was at that point that I was just like, no, this is not okay. It is not okay for this to be happening. It's really important for the rights of children, and my work very much does come from a child rights perspective. It's very important for the rights of children to be able to name this person who is most important to them when they're first born.
Okay. Well, we'll get there. But I do have one question, by the way. Do mothers? It's just a scientific question. Do mothers pass antibodies for COVID in the breast milk as well, or no?
They do, yes. It took us a
Okay.
while to find that out. And if they're
Yeah.
vaccinated,
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
also
Yeah.
so if they've been infected or if they've been vaccinated, yes, they'll be getting
Okay.
some
So you'd think that breastfeeding would be good then, I would have thought. But anyway, in
yeah,
that.
no, we got there eventually,
Yeah.
but
Now, but anyway, let's go back to this effort to get, which led to changing mothers to people,
well,
and as you talk about the damage in healthcare. But the first thing to realize is that even the term gender identity has changed. It used to be, um, uh, how their knowledge of their own sex, and then it changed. You argue as early as 1994 that it changed. So gender identity had delineated an internal sense of oneself as living in the social role of man or woman. So biology got removed. Gender is just one's sense of whether one's a man or a woman. Um, and and there is, and of course, gender and sex are different. Um, but the question, but they are different, and they're and the problem that you argue is replacing one with the other.
yeah, that's right. And I mean, you raise, I think what's quite important here, a lot of the issues around the conflict between gender identity and sex is about language. And
Hmm.
one of the difficulties that we have is this word gender has several different meanings. And
Yeah.
sometimes people, same word with two different meanings in the same sentence. And I think it's particularly difficult in the US because it's been very well established, I think, that gender means sex in the US. And so a lot of people use it as a synonym. So sometimes you can't tell what
Hmm.
they're speaking about. And then, of course, there's the feminist conceptualization of gender as meaning the social construction of the sexes. So stuff about sex stereotypes and what we expect of girls and boys, men and women, and that's also gender, also called gender. So sometimes it can be very difficult to work out what people are meaning. But this concept of gender identity, as it's used now, is so new. Like it's really
It's really.
we're looking at 50, 60 years maximum, really. And it's not just in relation to language that people are wanting to prioritize gender identity. They're also wanting to prioritize it in terms of things like data collection and
Well, that was you just went to where I was thinking of going based on your article. One can say language is language, but you point out that there's organizational efforts to replace sex with gender identity in policy and data collection, which of course is antithetical to science. Sex is a biological fact, and if in data collection you conflate it with something which isn't equivalent, then you're obscuring the data in science, and then it's very difficult to not only come up with scientific results that make sense, but then with policy results that are based on that science.
Well, and, in my area of work, like the female data gap is a massive problem. And so, various organisations for the last several decades have been saying we must collect data on sex. We must disaggregate data by
Yeah.
sex in terms of human research, because if we don't do that, then we actually can't get a good picture of what is going on, because the experiences of males and female people are different. The ways our body works are different. And if you don't do that, then you're missing a big part of the picture. And we still have areas of science and areas of research where men predominate in the research, and we know so little then about, well, this drug might work well for men, but it might not work well at all for women.
Mm.
Or they might need to have a different dose. And if you haven't included them in the research, then you just don't know. Or if you've included them in the research and you haven't disaggregated, then you just don't know. And so there has been this big push to collect data on sex, but now we're just, and it cuts across to social stuff too. So it's not just about medical concerns, but now we've got, um, scientists and governments and different organizations who are no longer collecting data on sex. They're just collecting data on gender identity. And this, I guess it depends upon the situation, how significant that's going to be, how many people there might be who give an answer to a question about gender identity that isn't connected to their sex, or how many people don't answer the question, or they don't participate in the research because they object to the question being asked. Those are things that we don't really have the answer to. But there was a recent piece of work done in the UK that looked at government surveys over the last 80 years, I think it was, and showed a really clear progression from collecting data on sex with a simple male and female answer to collecting data on sex but using the word gender when the question was asked, to then actually switching to collecting data on gender identity. And so that it's called the Sullivan Report. It was really, I think, showed what many people like myself had been noticing was happening over time, and confirmed that this is actually really a problem. But yeah,
Well,
I mean, it seems strange to replace sex, which is very concrete, and
mm,
we know how it affects people's lives very significantly,
yeah.
to this concept of gender identity that we don't even have a great definition for. We don't
Yeah.
even really know what it is, but we do know it's changeable.
Yeah.
We don't really know how it's connected to very much at all, really.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's a clearly malleable word, malleable term, and gender means many different things. But as we say in science, sex is well defined. But you also argue that it's not just well that th- not just, and we'll talk about this, dangerous for healthcare in general to not treat scientifically things correctly, but it's also dehumanizing. I mean, you talk about the replacement of words, placement of women and pregnant women and things with like, instead of women, like menstruators and vagina owners and chest feeding. It all sounds very dehumanizing, and rather ridiculous. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I perhaps should actually say why this is, why these
Yeah.
language changes and how they're happening. Uh, and nothing to do with female reproduction really is the focus of
Hmm.
this. And it's because you can't get it. There's not an area of human experience that is where sex is more important than female reproduction.
Yeah.
And so, in terms of trying to downgrade the importance of sex, using language that makes sex, that obscures sex, or makes sex less visible. And this is ostensibly to provide for the needs of people who have this sense of gender identity that they feel is in conflict with their sex. Um, people who are described as being transgender or gender diverse that get upset if their sex is referred to. The advocates are saying, well, we shouldn't, in order for these people to feel comfortable and not to feel distress, we should use language that for everybody that doesn't reference sex, so that this group can be okay. But it does mean sometimes it will mean just replacing the word woman or women with people. Other times, though, it will mean referencing female reproductive anatomy or physiological processes. So you get the word woman replaced by person with a cervix or a uterus haver or a vagina owner. Or sometimes even we go back to to these old concept of women as non-men. So we'll talk about women as non-men or non-males, or or these physiological processes. So like birthers, menstruators. And the same. It's very noticeable that the same sorts of terms are rarely being applied to men.
Well, and you point out, as you say, this is not just colloquial. It's becoming part of the peer-reviewed literature, the peer-reviewed journals replacing, birthing people instead of women. I was amazed. You did a Google Scholar search, and over this period from I think 2018 to 2023, you got an increase in references to birthing people from 23 to over 1,000 publications, and it's a 52-fold increase. It's just becoming, and even Lancet, which surprised me. Lancet is, it was famous. This famous paper describing women as bodies with vaginas, and when the organizations begin to do that, of course, there's a great deal of pressure on individuals to start doing it as well.
Yeah, and last year I had a really shocking experience with the Lancet Global Health. With some colleagues, we'd written a letter to the editor about mpox and breastfeeding in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and the letter was accepted. And at proofing, the editor asked for us to, if we could perhaps refer to chest feeding parents. And I think what was so offensive about that is that there would not be a single woman in the Democratic Republic of the Congo who would call herself a chest feeding parent. So it was not related to any concern about these women who were in extremely difficult circumstances, and who we were calling for WHO to assist, that they were asking for this.
Yeah, they're not. They're that kind of Western cultural, new. I was going to say norm, but hopefully maybe it is. But this Western cultural, um, obscure notion is not related to what's happening in the Congo or anywhere else.
No, and it's just like it's cultural imperialism. Like it really is, and it is an abuse of power. And journals are doing this to authors all over the world, whether it's reviewers or it's editors. It really is an abuse of power, and a lot of authors don't feel that they can push back.
Well, let's talk about that, the pushback. One of the things you talk about is University Ethics Committee. The case of Natalie Dinsdale was repeatedly questioned by a University Ethics Committee to dissex the language of her study on female reproductive anatomy and function. Over 3 rounds of revisions, the Ethics Committee questioned the use of women and female in study materials. She defended her use of sex language, but the fact that the ethics committees are pressuring researchers, when you're talking about female reproductive anatomy and function, you'd think sex is an important issue. You want to comment?
Yeah, she's in Canada, so so I think things are quite, there are parts of the world where it's more difficult than others. And, she was prepared to defend her position. But other people, not necessarily feel able to do that, or the time delay that can cause, quite a problem for them. And so, so again, they're not willing to do it, or they feel like they might end up in a position where they might not even get ethics approval if they don't do
Yeah.
what they're
Well,
told in
and if it's a
dark. But
problem for researchers, sorry, did you want to go? I didn't mean to interrupt you.
I was going to say, I mean, I have heard anecdotally, and I think it may be mentioned there in the chapter, where people have used language like birthing people or pregnant person in study recruitment materials, and women have just refused to, they just don't want to participate, and
Mm.
recruitment just has not gone well, and they've had to go back and actually get an ethics variation and change the language. So
Mm.
I think it's certainly not from respect. I mean, I think it's disrespectful of study participants to
But
use,
it's also not just
use that sort of
disrespectful.
language.
It's not just disrespectful, but as you point out, I mean, introducing errors in communication could be bad for public health. For example, um, a simple find and replace of women with people made statistics on the increasing severity of COVID during pregnancy incorrect. It began the UK's National Health Service included the statement 8 in 10 people under 40 will get pregnant within 1 year of having regular sex without contraception. And that's not quite true. Yeah. And then another claim, again, the Canadian Cancer Society said, if you've ever been sexually active, you should start having regular pap tests by the time you're 21. Again, clearly a recommendation for women, um, but not men, and for females and not males. I now try to use female and male for sex, and so I think I'll try and be consistent there. Um, and that's dangerous. That can be dangerous if people get the wrong um, uh, uh, um, uh, uh, information. As you point out, de-sex language and policy is particularly, this is from your quote, is particularly concerning as it might skew health priorities and resourcing, thus pushing the envelope from language to practice. Um, including women's health strategies, which now use the term women to refer to gender identity rather than female sex. Women's and Girls' Health Strategy for the state of Queensland, Australia, defines women and girls as all people who identify as women or men. And in that case, males with gender identity are included in those kind of studies and those kind of recommendations for what should be done. And you argue, obviously this is bad. Um, you want to elaborate on why?
Which particular aspect?
Well, using, oh, sorry. Um, I want to take that back. Let's start that one again, Hori. You've said that there are numerous arguments against using sex language that are used for why sex language should be removed. Do you want to give the main reasons that people give for that?
Well, they say it's more inclusive if you
Mm-hmm.
use desexed language.
Mm-hmm.
And they're considering, the group of people that would prefer that their sex not be referred to, that, it makes them uncomfortable and they won't engage with health services or health education materials that call them women if they don't see themselves as women. And that may absolutely be true. But what needs to happen for that particular group is, in fact, what we do for all groups who have particular needs that are different from the needs of the broader population. And so, in any health service in a place like the US or Australia, they produce health education materials in different languages because
Mm-hmm.
they know not everybody is going to be able to read and understand English. Sometimes they'll produce materials in Braille. They'll have materials that you can listen to if you can't, if you're vision impaired and you can't read. They'll have materials in terms of maternity care. They'll have particular materials regarding multiple pregnancies or regarding pregnancies where the fetus has Down syndrome, or where the baby has a cleft palate, or same-sex parents. There's all sorts of different groups that have specialist needs that they produce specialist materials for. And that's really what needs to happen with this group. So, for example, trans men, so women who have a gender identity of man, they have low rates of engagement with cervical cancer screening. They need to have, that is a health issue that needs to be addressed. They should be receiving specialist education and health promotion materials that they will engage with, that meets their needs, that tells them what they need to do, that's helpful to them, and services that will engage with them sensitively. But if you try and take the needs of one particular group and put it across the whole population, you don't meet anyone's needs.
Yeah,
It just doesn't work
it's
for
bad
anyone.
for everyone. It's bad for, I mean,
It's bad for
trans
everyone.
men are different than men, and trans women are different than women in terms of their health needs.
Mm.
They may, effectively be treated as women, and that's fine, but in terms of their health needs, is different. Now, you wrote a paper in 2022 on the importance of why sex language should be continued, and you said it risks decreasing overall inclusivity, dehumanizes women, includes people who should be excluded, introduces inaccuracies, um, uh, precludes precision, creates confusion, undermines breastfeeding, and works against recognition of mother-infant relationships. And you've argued that those are real dangers, and there should be more research, but there isn't any research being done in
No, there's been very little research. There's one small study that was done in the US with 16 participants, I think, 16 women,
Mhm.
low-income women, found they really hated terms like chest feeding and body feeding, and they said, I'd throw away a survey that had that word on it. There's a bit of research that's been done in Uganda that found that people found the terms confusing. So, for example, they thought that birthing parents referred to both mothers and fathers, but they also found many of these words to be ridiculous and offensive, and that they really did see them as cultural imperialism. And then there's been one bit of market research that was done in the US with Black Americans that found that people, if their health provider used a term like birthing parent for them, that they would hold them in less regard. So they found that that use of that sort of term would actually undermine confidence in health providers. But that's really all that there is. It's quite remarkable that these large changes that work against really well-established principles of health communication have been made in so many different places without any evidence to underpin
Without
it.
any evidence, which is the key thing that should be the basis of science. Yeah. Well, you conclude with talking about ways to uphold the science, working with colleagues on journals, getting ethics committees not to be outsourced to people who are not scientists, but are people who are social activists, um, and also finally increasing data collection uh, uh, on the nature of sex and health, right?
Yeah, yeah. I do think that I think it's getting a bit easier for conversations to be had. I think that more people are getting braver. There's been more publications talking about these issues, and people have got more confidence to actually say, "No, I don't think that that's okay." Uh, but yeah, I mean, I guess it's different in different parts of the world, and we're still getting it come through. It feels
Yeah.
like bureaucrats, within ministries of health are
Yeah.
really, some of them are quite keen on this, and they're quite influential. And
Well, look,
so yeah.
I think your arguments are important to hear, and I'm glad you've written them down. I'm glad you've written them, included them in the book here, and our discussion. And I think I want to end with your last statement, which I think is the key one. We must act with integrity to advocate for a reinstatement of evidence over ideology in science and public health. And that's the key point. This is all about. When it comes to healthcare and science, we should base it on evidence over ideology. And that's one of the points of the book, and really certainly an important point of your contribution. I really want to thank you for the work you're doing and for being here and for writing. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'd add just one more thing, I think, to that.
Sure.
And that's, and be brave. And when you are, you find there are other good people out there. And I've got to say, like, it's not always been easy to be having these discussions and arguments. And certainly there's been plenty of bridges burnt and various cancellation attempts and
it's
all
hard
of
to be
that sort
brave.
of thing that many people have had.
And as we talk about in a number of places in the book and another thing, unfortunately, the people that really need to be brave are the ones who don't have spine, who are the heads of these organizations. And if the heads of these organizations aren't brave, then it's hard for people who are just worried about getting their paychecks to be brave. And so there's a lot of, work needs to be done. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, thanks again. It's been a pleasure talking to you across the world with the wonders of science that have allowed us to do this. And let's keep science going. Thanks again. It's a pleasure.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Lawrence.
Hi, it's Lawrence again. As the Origins podcast continues to reach millions of people around the world, I just wanted to say thank you. It's because of your support, whether you listen or watch, that we're able to help enrich the perspective of listeners by providing access to the people and ideas that are changing our understanding of ourselves and our world and driving the future of our society in the 21st century. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please consider leaving a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. You can also leave us private feedback on our website if you'd like to see any parts of the podcast improved. Finally, if you'd like to access ad-free and bonus content, become a paid subscriber at originsproject.org. This podcast is produced by the Origins Project Foundation as a non-profit effort committed to enhancing public literacy and engagement with the world by connecting science and culture. You can learn more about our events, our travel excursions, and ways to get involved at originsproject.org. Thank you.